Hi, everyone, and welcome to Getting Your Tax Decisions Right in a Changing Global Economy. My name is Mimi, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we dive in, just want to get through a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice, but we will answer your questions as best we can. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review it while I continue with some additional housekeeping. We are recording today's event, so if you want to listen to it again or share it with a colleague, you'll receive the recording within the next 24 hours. The console you're looking at can be customized, so feel free to move around or resize the windows. Slides can be resized by dragging the bottom corner or by downloading the PDF slide deck under Additional Resources. The Additional Resources section contains related resources. Sorry, I lost my spot there. If there's any you'd like to go check out, go ahead and click on them now, as the console will be automatically closed at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, please submit them by using the Ask a Question box. We will answer as many as possible throughout the webcast and during the Q&A time at the end of the presentation. We like to save about 10 minutes for that at the end. You may also submit webinar troubleshooting questions there. Join the group chat by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen with the little chat bubbles. The group chat will pop up on your screen. We encourage you all to introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from. Oh, sorry, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. And again, if you have any technical issues, there is a question mark icon at in the box, or you can also reach out through the Ask a Question box. Now on to our CPE information. So we are offering 1 CPE credit for today's presentation. For those looking to receive a CPE credit today, please note that we will ask you to respond to 3 of our 4 poll questions. The poll question will pop up on your screen for a limited amount of time, so please make sure that you are ready to answer them when the question appears. Please do not split or tile screens on your computer, as this can affect the placement of the poll question. You must also attend the full 60-minute durations to qualify for a CPE credit. Once you have met these requirements, your CPE certificate will be available to download in the certification box on your screen. Click the icon to access it. It will open up in a new tab, and your certificate, just in case, will also be sent in a post-event email. Unfortunately, we are unable to provide CPE credit to those who have technology issues that prevent them from qualifying. And now on to today's presenters. So first, I'd like to introduce Maria Tringali. She is a senior solutions consultant here at Avalara. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself really quickly? Well, it looks like we're having some sound issues there, Maria. We can't hear you. While we get those all figured out, I'm going to pass it over to Luke really quickly too. So Luke Marlett is also joining us today. He's a solutions consultant here at Avalara as well. Luke, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hey everybody, I'm Luke. I represent the Avalara Tax Research product here at Avalara, and I've been doing this for about 6.5 years now in one way or another, and happy to be here and show off this cool tool.
Great.
I'm back. Sorry about that, Mimi.
Back.
So
right, perfect.
I was on mute. I was trying to be so quiet. I was on mute. So nice to meet everyone. Maria Tringali. I'm with the Kella Solutions Consultant, just like Luke here, and I specialize in businesses that don't have to charge a lot of retail sales tax and all the other sort of compliance things that they have to worry about. So delighted to be here to talk about tax compliance for everybody, should we say, and how we can leverage this very cool tool to understand how the laws apply to our business.
Perfect. All right, and now we're going to just do our first CPE poll question before we jump into the rest of the webinar today. So the first question is, what does your company struggle with most as it relates to changing tax compliance obligations? A, tax reporting amidst changing tax rates and rules. B, keeping up with changing tax rates in different states and jurisdictions. C, keeping up with changing indirect tax rates. Or D, managing international sales transactions amid different reporting standards and collection paradigms. I'll give you all a moment to respond. Okay, just a few more moments here. All right. And we'll take a look at these responses. Right now, it looks like it's pretty close with tax reporting and keeping up with all those different states and jurisdictions' tax rates. Thank you all for participating in our first one. Like I said, there will be 3 more. I'm now going to pass it on over to Luke to get started with our webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mimi. So this is the agenda we'll be covering today. We're going to talk about part of the reason that managing this stuff can be so difficult. And then I'll pass it over to Maria, and she'll talk a little bit about Avalara generally and how we can support you, as well as some global trends and things that we're seeing based on places we've been and studies we've done, right? And then I'm going to dive into the tax research solution and do a little bit of a demo, and then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A. So what's so hard about all this stuff, right? One, right, we've got all the different states are doing kind of all their own thing. Even among the SST states where they've all agreed to do the same thing, things can be different. Things are taxed differently. Laws are obviously written differently. And so you've got a lot of shifting and changing with just the taxability. Then when we dive into the individual states, you've got changing jurisdictions, you've got changing tax boundaries, you've got changing tax rates. So all of these things combined turn into this really kind of complicated and complex, mesh of laws that we all as tax professionals have to figure out. We have to go get it right. So that's why it can be so difficult to get into those things. There's also changes in the way collection is done, right? So, and I think we may get into this a little bit more in detail later in the webinar, but things like e-invoicing and live reporting internationally, right? Things like real-time tax collection that happen internationally that don't happen here in the States, those kind of things, as they change and as they kind of hit us as, again, tax professionals, we're going to have to figure that out as states play catch up. And so all of those shifts, that's what Avalara is here for, right? We're getting ahead of that. We've got a gigantic program around e-invoicing and live reporting going on, as well as our tools, AvaTax, ECM, all these other tools that Maria will talk a little bit about, and the tax research platform, right? We're here to help give you the information that you need to stay as far ahead of this kind of stuff as you can. So what we find is that the biggest challenge tends to be, how do I even know this information is right? How do I stay on top of this stuff as a tax professional, right? The one thing is the changing rules and all that, and we get that, right? There is change, laws change, industry norms change, technology changes. So we get that there is some change there. But the problem we have here, especially in the States, is that everybody seems to be playing catch up. And then you'll get a rapid change. You'll get a whole bunch of change all at once because everybody will go, oh, we got to do something about this. I don't know, those of you that remember, of course, Wayfair, that was a massive change. Before that, changes in tax law around SaaS and things like that were kind of a big, massive, rapid change, even though some states are still playing catch up there. And so when we look forward, one of the things that we see, and one of the things that's a big deal in business, is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we just want to touch on this because Avalara is uniquely positioned in a way through the tax research platform that a lot of the things that folks will expect from artificial intelligence, clear, plain language answers, already exists in Avalara Tax Research. So by no means are we there yet. We do not have an AI offering to give out, but we are positioned in such a way that when that becomes a reality, we will be far and away better what's the word I'm looking for? Better position to serve you, our customers, with that kind of an offering. So, and Amelia or Mimi, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. All right, our second CPE poll question is here. The question is, how would you categorize your company's data management and hygiene practices? A, excellent. B, good. C, neutral. D, mediocre. We're working on improving our data management and hygiene. Or E, poor. We have a data management and hygiene problem. I'll give you all a few moments to respond. Looks like we've got 50%, 60% submitted. And just a note, be sure to answer it as it pops up on your screen. Sometimes folks tend to add it to their Q&A box. So. Okay. Looks like across the board, it's pretty good with 43%. I'm going to pass it over to Maria now. Thanks so much.
Awesome. I just wonder what neutral is. Is that kind of like 50-50? Do we think we kind of have some good and we kind of have some? I talk with a lot of people about their data management because it's heavily related to exemption certificates, which again, if you're sell to a lot of exempt businesses, this tool that we're going to talk about is really going to help you understand those laws. But understanding the customers that need to be exempt is definitely related to the data that you have on file and the data management. So I have a lot of conversations about that. So let's talk about Avalara's full compliance suite, and then we're going to kind of hone in on one of those, and that's the tax research library that Luke's such a great specialist on. But let's talk about compliance as a whole and sort of what good looks like. So if you talk about thinking about getting your business into compliance, and I talk with a lot of customers every day, as does Luke, and they're all in sort of different phases, kind of like our data management question. Everybody's in different phases of being compliant, and there's compliance in different ways. And Avalara is really an end-to-end solution provider. So if you look at that slide in front of you there, it starts with making sure that our business is licensed well. Do we have all the licenses we need to be in business? And that does include sales tax registrations. That includes understanding where those tax laws apply to us and where we should be registered for sales and use tax, where we're required to remit and file, how are our products taxed, that sort of thing. So are we licensed properly in a state? The next is what we're highlighting today, and we call it tax research, or that's really understanding your business, understanding if I sell pieces of equipment with a warranty and parts, how does that state treat that? When I do a big proposal or a big bid for a prospect or prospective customer, do I understand how the tax laws affect that project and that bid? That can be the difference between winning and losing a project. And then we have exemption certificates, my favorite, and that is that customer exempt for whatever reason? Are they reselling? Are they the contractor? Are they a reseller or a distributor? Or are they an exempt entity that I'm selling to? That sort of thing. Do I have those in good shape? A lot of people are really good at collecting them, but they're not necessarily as good at validating and maintaining them. Then there's a calculation piece. This is kind of the core that everybody knows a tax company manages now. And that is, do we actually calculate the right amount of tax when needed to calculate? Then there's returns and reporting. We've got to remit that revenue to the government somehow. We're doing that on time. Are we doing it accurately? And then there's going out of your home selling area. So going global, if you're US, going out of the US, if you're in another country, coming into the US, and there's understanding how do the laws affect us globally. So Avalara can help you for any one or all of these along the way, especially as your business grows and changes over time. So if we take that thought and we put that into sort of a software suite, this is what it can look like. So the tax research library that Luke's going to show you is really the first place that you want to use to understand your business and how the laws apply to it, how things are taxed, how to exemptions, what products are taxed or exempt based on how they're combined, how the exemption certificates work in that state, what types can we accept, what can we accept them for, et cetera. It's a whole library full of things. And this is what I call kind of the first phase of understanding compliance. Then the next thing we need to do is get those exemption certificates. If you have them in your business, we need to make sure that those are not only collected, which is what everybody can do, but collected and validated and managed in a centralized location and maintained. I talked to gajillions of businesses and most people say we collect them and that's about the end of it. You need to think a little bit past that. We need to think, is it the right document for the right reason? Is it maintained? Is it renewed? Is it up to date? Is it valid? Did I get my new ones for Florida, which expire every year? So we're talking about a software platform that helps you with collection and maintenance and validation of those actual documents. Then that attaches to the tax determination engine, which most people are used to. This is where I might plug into my ERP or my e-commerce platform or my point of sale and actually calculate tax. But we call that a tax determination, not calculation, because at the time of sale, you want to actually determine whether or not that customer or product is taxable before we actually calculate something. So when you plug into a tax determination engine, no matter what it is, whether it's Avalara's or somebody else's, you can plug in our exemption certificate management platform to make a live real-time tax determination. And then lastly, if all your data flows through a tax engine like Avalara, then you have everything you need for your sales tax returns filing. All the data is already in the system and you don't have to go run reports from various systems and kludge those together and try to get all that together and then file your returns. So this makes sort of a smooth process from beginning to end. It looks like we have another question. How much do you agree or disagree with the following? Managing changing regulations and the labyrinth of websites and information portals to find correct tax answers is one of the most difficult tasks for tax managers today. What are your thoughts on that? And as Mimi said, please answer on the screen, not in the Q&A. That way we can see the results.
Yeah. Looks like we've got 44%. I'll give you all a couple more moments. Okay. Perfect. Okay, let's see those answers. As expected, most folks strongly agree with that statement.
Nobody strongly disagrees, Mimi.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So that's great information. Thanks everyone for responding. So it is really hard to keep up with the tax rates on the websites, and that's where the tax research tool is definitely going to come in and help. And it's also, remember, that tax determination, like understanding when can I exempt something, when can't I exempt something? Is that product taxable? Is that customer taxable, right? So you need, a lot of people come to us with the question on, I just want tax rates in my system, but we need to think a little more holistically about the entire business, not just the small percentage that's actually taxable. And that's what we're talking about today. How do we understand those laws? So as I mentioned in kind of the last part of my chart, we need to talk about going out of our comfort zone, out of our country, and really even into other states from the states that we're sort of comfortable with, and how that's impacting. Luke was talking about the changes that are going on, and there's just ever evolving changes going on in the world. So a couple things that we see globally now are real-time tax reporting. So that real-time reporting, the electronic filing with the government is really on the rise. So if you are doing business outside of the US, you need to understand the different laws and how they affect your business and what the requirements are outside of your comfort zone. Everywhere we see tax authorities are stepping up to meet data management challenges. So they are wanting more data from us. They're wanting more data from the sellers. They're wanting live information. It's not just trusting that we send it later. And then, of course, AI and machine learning, which we're going to talk about, are really providing new opportunities for both the government entities that collect this from businesses, as well as those of us who are providers, as well as you as a business or as an accountant or CFO can leverage to provide information better and faster to the authorities. Digital business models are growing. This is huge. We are seeing, Luke and I see every day of business going all over the world, and we're selling B2B digitally, we're selling B2C online, we're combining, we're creating separate websites. And then, of course, there's the spread of e-invoicing in the EU and the different requirements that businesses are struggling to keep up with. How this is, the government makes laws and then they expect the businesses to try to figure out how to make sure they're compliant with those laws. And then, of course, there's just talent management, right? And we can hire talent, we can hire people, but can we hire people that actually can solve these issues for us? Do they really have the information in their brains? I think this is where good technology comes in, because hiring people is great and terrific and we can have them do other things, but do humans actually have the information that some technology can supplement for? So I'm going to turn this back over to Luke here in a minute, and we're going to talk about what our tax managers are really facing and how our products and services can help. So as we just pointed out, we're dealing with a more demanding role and more diversity and more information being thrown at you. Different tax types, different taxability, navigating those websites that we talked about. What are the regulatory requirements? What are the risks? I always tell the reps that I work with here, we are in the risk business. We have to worry about as a company, you have to worry about as a company, what is our risk management? How much are we willing to, how compliant? I always ask people, how compliant do you want to be? Do you want to be 100% compliant? Are you good with like 75? Or, how do we feel about that? What is our business model around that? And then what is our overall reliance on manual processes? Are we still relying on humans to do some of the work that we might be able to rely on technology and make our lives a lot easier by relying on good, solid technology? These are all things you have to think about every day, and that applies in the tax compliance world. So back to the data question that we asked in the beginning, tax managers have to collect more data than ever before from tax authorities, from court rulings. I get a lot of people, I'm not kidding you, that will say to me, well, how was I supposed to know this? You need to keep up with those laws. That is part of your responsibility to an organization, to read publications, to stay up on these things. Like it or not, tax compliance is part of running a business, even though we didn't get into the business to do that. And then from there, you have to determine the accuracy of your research. If you're looking around and getting things off of Google, off of somebody else's website, is that accurate? How do we know that what we found today is actually accurate and applies to our business? These are all things, unfortunately, that you need to worry about as tax managers, CFOs, controllers, and financial responsibilities accountants, CPAs have to worry about today. And it doesn't seem hard on the surface, or it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but you all know once you open that can of worms, there's a lot going on underneath the surface. So I'm kind of the bearer of bad news here, Luke. I'm going to let you be the fun one and tell them what the benefits are of a good research solution.
Great, thanks, Maria. So, when we're using a tax research solution, why are we doing that, right? What's the point of doing that? Why does that help us? All right. So today, companies may be using a service. Companies may be just going to Google, calling the state, relying on maybe a senior tax manager that's got 30 years of experience. Some mix of all those things, or relying on outside consultants where you've got to pay each time you've got a question or an issue that you got to deal with. So what we see is, it says hours per week are wasted, and I think that's what was written in the thing. And it's not wasted time, right? We're learning something at a bare minimum, so it's not necessarily wasted time, but it does take a lot of time. We did a report recently with a consulting company and an analysis, I should say, and they found that 35 hours per month, 35 hours per month is the average time that tax managers and tax directors spend researching tax laws. So that's a lot of time. That's almost a full week per month that folks are spending just looking stuff up and getting understanding on things. So it's a lot of time that it takes. Like I talked about a little while ago, every state almost does it differently. So it's a whole bunch of different regulations, and we're expecting us to be experts in 50 states or 46 states, or 40 if you include DC, but there's a lot of space that you need to cover and understand just to be able to get things done and get things correct. E-commerce and platforms where we're selling online, and this is, I think somebody asked a question about internet sales taxable. That depends. Depends on the state, depends on what you're selling, depends on if you've got nexus in that state, right? So if you don't have physical presence, there are economic nexus laws, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit in the demo so you can see where Avalara Tax Research would help with that. But understanding those rules and understanding who you're selling it to and how are they using it? Do they have some sort of an exemption for it, right? All of those things can be a big challenge, and having a good research solution can make all of that easier. And then, of course, that last thing, and we're kind of talking about it already, is South Dakota versus Wayfair. So that was 2018. That was 6 years ago now. So even though that was 6 years ago, there are still companies that are having challenges with economic nexus, right? It's not always super cut and dry. Different states have different economic nexus thresholds. They've got different deregistration requirements. They've got different, maybe you only sell once a year or twice a year into a place, so you're an occasional seller. So all of these different rules and all of these different states, again, tax research is going to help with all of this stuff. So using a tax research tool, right? Just using a generic tax research tool, you're probably going to improve your accuracy a little bit. You're probably going to reduce your research time a little bit. But you probably, if you're not using Avalara Tax Research at least, you're probably not going to have access to tax researchers that you can ask questions without having to pay for it. And you may get a decrease in penalties and fines due to lack of compliance, again, using a generic solution, right? Something is better than nothing. But if you're using Avalara Tax Research, your improved accuracy is going to be such that you are going to have a reduction in risk, in penalties, and fines. The reason I say this, we back up all of our information directly with the states, and we are, I know I'm bragging a little bit, but we are so good at this that 3 states even use us as their public-facing website, right? So the states of Colorado, Missouri, and then Alaska, it's the municipal league up in Alaska. They trust us to provide this information to their taxpayers. So using Avalara Tax Research is going to improve your accuracy. Using Avalara Tax Research, if we talk about time spent, that same report that I referenced, the 35 hours a month, companies that use Avalara Tax Research on average spend 3 hours a month. That's a little bit better than a 90% reduction in research time. So if the time you spend today is a challenge for you and your business, if it's a cost for you and your business, let's think about it that way. That means one resource is spending about a week's worth of work. Using Avalara Tax Research, you can make that Monday morning's worth of work as opposed to the entire week, right? And that study is what we found through that. So how do we do this? How do we make sure we're accurate? How do we know what we're doing, right? So we're sourcing over 27,000 web pages a day. Now it's not just some, poor person in a basement clicking on web pages all day. It's not that bad. We do use technology to scrub websites and check for changes and stuff like that. But all of those changes, even the ones that are captured just by automation, we've got a team, we've got multiple levels of review to make sure that we're pulling that in, we're attaching it to the relevant answers in our service, and then we're able to cite that and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. Part of the service you get with Avalara Tax Research, and I talked about maybe you're having to pay an outside consultant, maybe you're having to ask questions that it takes a few weeks to get an answer to. Using Avalara Tax Research, when you ask us a question, you're going to get your answer in 24 to 48 hours. It's going to come back to you in plain language with the legal citations included, and it doesn't cost you any more money on top of the cost of your subscription, right? It is included with your subscription. Talked about the plain language answers. I'll show that off when I do the demo here in a few minutes. But we give simple yes and no answers on taxability. Is it taxable here? Yes or no, right? Mandy, to answer your question, probably. So Avalara Tax Research hasn't researched exactly every single thing in the world, but we have researched quite a bit. Your specific product type is probably covered. Now, is that down to like a SKU level? Probably not, but certainly to a category level. The other thing that we do really well is define and provide overviews for things, right? Talking about processes and procedures, I think about something like the construction area. So any of you that happen to be in the construction industry know that sales tax and construction, I mean, internally we say it's the calculus of sales tax, right? It is incredibly complicated. And we talk about all the different rules for the different states. Just take a dip into construction and you'll really see what I mean. But what we do, one of the things that we do is we provide multiple overviews in the construction industry so that all of those processes and procedures can become more clear, right? We put that stuff into plain language. We call out those individual things. We talk about the different ways that contracting happens or the different types of construction. So we do try to capture all those different processes and procedures, and again, provide them to you in a way that's easy to understand and easy to reference. So here are a couple of screenshots, and I'm gonna dive in and do a demo, and we are gonna talk a little bit about Nexus in this demo. We are gonna talk a little bit about exemption certificates as well, because there was a question earlier about exemption certificates. How do we know we're using the right one? And from there, I'm going to show off a couple of the features. A few things I've already talked about, but so this is a screenshot of kind of the way we do this, right? We organize things by what are bought and sold. It's not just a table of contents that you may be, used to working with a state website. We're going to organize it by what's bought and sold. Again, we give those straightforward yes and no answers. Is this taxable here? Yes or no. Now, you may see a few places where this says see explanation. Even though we try to get it to simple yes or no everywhere, there are some things that have nuance. We'll dive into that. You'll see that. And then we've got rooftop rate lookups. So you can type in the address or the latitude, longitude, and get the exact rate at that exact location. All right, and Mimi, do we want to do the question first, or should I do my demo first?
The demo, I'll just push us back, and then we'll jump in for a CPE at the end. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Okay, so let me do this. Screen share. Okay, so I hope everyone can see my screen. I hope I've done this right. It's my first time doing a webinar. So this is Avalara Tax Research, like I've been talking about, and at a high level, we take all the sales and use tax law in the country and in many parts of the world, and we make it simple. I've talked about, we put everything in plain language. We give simple yes and no answers. We provide a ton of support around this. You're going to have unlimited training. You're going to have access to those tax researchers where you can ask questions and get answers. You're going to be able to set up alerts and updates and make sure that you are staying abreast of all the changes and all the complexity that's going on. So you can see a few different areas that I've got here. Today, we're going to spend most of our time here in the tax answers library. And so as I dive into this, you saw that screenshot. We've organized things by what are bought and sold. And a couple of key areas I want to touch on. So first, this taxes and doing business area. This section right here, up here, this taxes and doing business, in my opinion, it's worth the price of admission all by itself. This is all of the rules that you need to know, like how do I do sales tax in a state? This is all those rules. From the very simple stuff, like what does a state call their sales tax? Those of you in Arizona, you're familiar that the TPT, right? I actually was talking to somebody from Arizona the other day. I called it a sales tax and was given a bit of a tongue lashing because I didn't say TPT. So, but that is something that we may understand in the sales tax world, in the sales tax professional world, but when you're describing this to somebody else, or maybe you're new to this and you don't understand that, right? We're going to have that information in here. We're also going to have a little more complicated information, like how do I get a refund? How do I do credits? What happens when I get audited? What happens if we do progressive billing? Am I supposed to charge my tax all up front, or am I supposed to charge it on each individual invoice? So all those kind of rules and that kind of information is in there. Also, we've got things like registrations. Now, Avalara can do that for you, right? We have services where we can take care of your sales tax registrations for you and returns and all those kind of things. But also, if you just need that information, it's going to be here in Avalara Tax Research. So let's talk a little bit about Nexus. So I'm just diving into my Nexus library here. I'm going to grab the state of Washington. And you can see we've got 27 different answers just around Nexus, okay? And the big one that a lot of folks come up against is, hey, is there an economic nexus rule in this state? And we answer that explicitly in one item. Is there an economic nexus rule, yes or no? And then we're going to tell you what the threshold is, right? Now, there may be details. Do exempt sales or wholesale sales count? What if I'm doing things through a marketplace? Do those things count? You can see over here on the left that we answer those questions as well as, like when it took place. So different states have different rules. A lot of them say, hey, exempt sales count. So you've got to track those exempt sales so that when you do go over the threshold, if you've got taxable sales into that state, that you're making sure you stay on top of that, get registered, collect, and remit where appropriate. The other thing I really like to call out in Nexus. So economic nexus in some ways is straightforward, right? We know it's complicated because it's new, right? It just happened 6 years ago, but it's also, there's a threshold. There's a few rules around that threshold, but once you pass the threshold, you've got nexus. Physical nexus, on the other hand, which we think of can be very simple. If we've got people there, if we've got inventory there, right? We've probably got nexus. But there are a lot of other rules with physical nexus. Some states have rules that if you go to a trade show for a couple of days and you're there for more than a set amount of time, now you've triggered nexus in that state. Some states have stuff like, do I run TV ads in that state? So even stuff like that can create nexus. That sounds complicated. That sounds, even beyond all the stuff we're talking about, that sounds kind of nuts. Good thing Avalara Tax Research has already researched all this stuff for you. And then what we did is we put it all into one question. So we went through all the parts in the code, which in Washington, it would have been at least 5 parts of their law that you would have had to read through to understand nexus fully in their state. We did it all. We put it all in one spot. Then we gave you a list of questions. If you answer yes to any of them, you've got nexus, right? It's that straightforward. Once you have nexus, then it is, hey, do we need to go get registered? Do we need to collect and remit? Do we have taxable sales there? All that kind of stuff. So one of the ways that we can also then help save time is this compare button. So if I was doing a nexus exercise and I wanted to look at nexus across all the states, all I need to do is hit one button. And I've got all the rules, all the requirements. I've got a simple question and answer format that I can get to understand, hey, do I have nexus in this state? And now you can, of course, do this with taxability, right? If we're talking, maybe you sell SaaS and you go in there, you hit that compare button and you can see where's SaaS taxable. So those are the kind of things that you're able to do with that compare button. We find this to be a huge time saver when it comes to research, right? Instead of going to Google multiple times, going to multiple state websites, I hit the button, my research is done everywhere. One of the things that we find customers really love about this is the ability to share information. They hit that email button, the information goes out, you can share that internally, externally. We had somebody at a conference that we were at about 4 or 5 months ago now. He stood up in front of the whole crowd and said this was his favorite thing about the whole tool was ending arguments. So he would just email the information out and not have to, contest taxability again. The history button, we talked about this is verified every day. There's our little verified stamp, but also you can see the history of the research. You can look at the timeline and you can even click on what happened and see the change note, whether that's a change, clarification, or a confirmation. That'll actually show up on the research timeline there. And you can look at all those at once. I can turn on my highlight changes, and then I can see, hey, where did these things happen? So I've already talked a little bit about this, the contact a tax expert. One thing that I will additionally talk about, or two things rather. One is this team is mostly made up of attorneys, and they are all expert researchers. So you're getting access to a team that does this day in and day out. They go find the additional nuance, the additional clarifications, and get them out to our customers. Last year, we answered just over 8,400 questions. 95% of those were answered in less than 24 hours, and 76% were actually answered in less than an hour. So we can move pretty close to the speed of your business when it comes to, I need information, I need it very quickly. This is a service that you're going to be able to use. And again, this is included with your subscription. You do not have to pay per question, generally. So those are some of the features. The last thing I did want to talk about on this demo here is the exempt entities and transactions. So how do we know what kind of certificate our customer is using, and is that valid? One, this exemption certificate system. This is all the information about the exemption certificates. When are they due as part of a sale? What is the period for which they're valid? Right? When do I need to renew, et cetera, et cetera? Does my state accept multi-state certificates or out-of-state certificates? All that information is going to be in here. But what I want to talk about is the exempt entities library. So what we've done here is captured all of the blanket or entity level exemptions. And then we have researched them, of course. And we've explained that exemption in each state, and then also included what the accepted forms are. So let's scroll down a little bit. Let me find one here in Kansas. So if you're selling to a broadcaster, as an example, we're going to talk about, hey, what are some of it looks like there's no broad-based exemption, but we're going to talk about some of the individual bits and pieces that may qualify them for an exemption. The example I often like to use is California, where a company is supposed to fit under certain NAICS codes in order to qualify for the California manufacturing exemption. So those kinds of things, that kind of information is going to be in here. And then, like I said, here's the accepted forms. What form do you need to ask for from your customer in order to make sure that you are okay from a audit standpoint? So that's an Avalara Tax Research demo. I'm going to stop sharing now, come back here and turn my camera back on. So now I'm going to move on and pass it back to Mimi.
Thanks, Luke. So one last CPE poll question before we get into all of the questions. What is the hardest part of managing tax compliance for your company? A, sales tax calculations. B, determining when or where to register. C, keeping up with changing tax laws. D, managing consumer use tax. E, filing and remitting returns. F, managing exemption certificates. And G, e-invoicing requirements. There's quite a few options there, so I'll give you all a moment to put in your answers. Just a couple more. Okay. We've got Almost everybody. Okay. And let's see those responses. Well, it's keeping up with changing tax laws, so it seems like you all are in the correct webinar to learn more about that. I'm going to push us over to the Q&A. I've got quite a few questions coming in from the audience. First and foremost, a couple of these. So how much is an ATR subscription is the first question. Maybe we can speak a little bit about the pricing there. But in addition to that, it's kind of a two-parter. How does anyone get access to ATR? Is it found through their Avatax subscription? Is it work as an add-on? Luke or Maria, if you could speak to either of those things just a little bit. We've got a couple questions there.
Yeah, excuse me. From pricing, it depends a little bit on your business, right? We do look at the size of your business, but also the different offerings, right? So the different levels of service. What I was showing you today is what's considered a standard subscription. So there's a lot more than just what I showed you today, right? We just kind of scratched the surface. But we would want to kind of discuss that, depending on each business's needs to make sure that we're fitting exactly what you need and all that kind of stuff. So that answered that. What was the second part of that question, Mimi? Sorry.
It's fine. The second part of the question was related to can you get it through, if you have Avatax, for example, how do you gain access to ATR? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is considered a separate subscription from Avatax, right? This is just one of our product or suite of products. Wow. So, and everything here is a la carte, right? We want to build the solution that works best for you. So you can add as little or as much of the products as you want. So if you've got an Avatax subscription, you have probably the research that's being done supports Avatax, but you don't have access to this tool specifically. You would need a separate subscription.
Right. And just to add to that, there's nothing to be set up with the tax research tool. It's just a subscription to a giant library. As Luke said, you can ask questions, you can research things, you can save things. There's no setup required. It's literally just a subscription fee to have access to the detail behind that. And as Ganna said in the beginning, this is where you understand your business in the very beginning. The same content is behind Avatax when you get to the invoice creation. But this is the part where you see the sort of behind the scenes, but there's nothing to program, no tax footprint to enter or anything. You just have access to all this never-ending information.
Yeah, and somebody had asked a question in there as well about number of users. You can have as many folks at your company use this as you like, right? The license is for your business. So if you need to have 30 users, let's sign them all up, and then let's get them trained, and let's retrain them when we need to retrain them, right? We're going to be here to support you through the whole journey.
Great. Okay, another question coming in from Pauline. Are internet sales taxable in the US if the company does not have physical presence in the state?
So that depends. And I talked a little bit about that with Nexus, right? So first of all, is your product taxable in that state normal, right? And if it is, then it's just a matter of how much have you sold into that state. Once you cross the threshold, it then becomes taxable. You need to get registered, start charging tax. If you only sell $10,000 of it into a state every year, then you probably don't need to get registered at any point. But those rules could change, right? The laws could change. And with Avalara Tax Research, of course, you'd stay on top of that and you'd know when those things change.
That's true. Another question from Annie. I would like to know if Avalara software can help me select the best sales tax exemption certificate for my suppliers for different states, and if it helps me evaluate each rule to choose the correct one. I'm not sure how much that does relate exactly to ATR, but I think it's a good question if either of you can answer.
Yeah, ATR can certainly help you determine those things from just giving you the right information, right? But I would recommend at that point that you also look at our ECM solution, which Maria represents, because that's not only going to have that information, but it's also going to have validation software, and it's going to allow you to make sure you're getting it right or your customer's sending you the right certs. Maria can probably tell a horror story or two about customers that have received things like driver's license registrations and crazy things about, yeah, here's our
all kinds of
exemption.
stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and she's also mentioning sending them to her suppliers for herself for purchasing. So remember, certificates come like incoming from your customers and outgoing from you. So yeah, the software Avalara can help you with both of those things. But again, the library kind of gives you the laws and how they apply to your business, where the software is the one that's actually going to take action on invoices or purchase invoices or sales invoices.
Thank you for chasing you.
Thanks, Maria. We've got a little background noise coming in from you. Do you mind just going on mute really quick? I'm sorry. Thank you so much. So another question coming in, and I think you might have covered this in the demo here, Luke, but saving searches and sharing them with others on your team, is that something that you can do with the ATR tool?
Yeah, and so there's a few ways to do that. One is that email button. You can share that information out. What that's going to do is share the individual answer. Excuse me. So you can also do things like when you hit the compare button, there's an export button at the top right where you can export that. So if you're going to compare and look at the research across all the states, you can actually export that into Excel and share that. There are ways with a premium subscription, you can build a multi-state, multi-product matrix that you can either share internally. When you save that matrix, you can include all the other subscribers in your company, or you can export that and share that out. What else? Those are probably the key ways that I would share that information with folks. Yeah.
Okay. Another question. So about drop shipping. So could you speak a little bit to how, if at all, ATR can help with managing drop shipping and the compliance attached to that?
Yeah. So ATR actually in the shipping library, we've got a drop shipping sub library where you can pick different scenarios based on where you and depending on if you're the distributor or the manufacturer, the other party and the customer, you can, based on where everybody's located, you can build out and look at everything all at once, including, do we have to provide a cert? Can we provide an out-of-state cert? All those kind of questions. Who's responsible for tax in this scenario? Who, where's everybody registered? Like all of those things, even in some states where the state makes both the distributor and the manufacturer charge tax, but then only one of them can get the tax back. We've got that information. So we've got that all in a library, but also one thing, and I didn't show it off, but it is included in the standard subscription, is our decision trees. And we have a drop shipping decision tree where you can just go through and set your exact scenario, pick the stuff you're worried about or that you're interested in, and then surface that and show that as well. So yeah, we handle quite a bit of drop shipping, and we've got a cool little tool to use to help you get it right as well.
Yeah, it's probably one of our, I think it's one of the most complicated aspects of tax compliance. We get a lot of questions about that pretty regularly. It's good to know. Yeah. I have a higher level question for you and Maria from Joe. Do remote sellers have different sales tax rates than sellers located in the state?
You want to check that, or you want me to, Luke?
Yeah. So again, it depends, right? Depends on the state, depends on the sourcing rules for the state. Typically, when you're remote selling, it's almost always destination based. So you're going to charge tax based on the destination. But if there's a state, I won't say something I'm not 100% sure of. That's why we hire all those really smart lawyers, beyond Maria and I. But if that information, if a state does have a different rate, we would have that information in Avalara Tax Research. Yeah.
Right. I would also say, though, in general, if you're in state and you're selling an item to my house, right? I live in Washington and you're selling an item to my house in Washington. But if you're in Nevada and you're sending an item to my house in Washington, the tax rate is the tax rate at my house, right? Depending on what you're selling. That wouldn't be different based on the seller, if that makes sense. The rate is the rate at address. And there's sourcing rules, destination and origin sourcing rules, like in Texas, and California has a little bit of mixed sourcing. But in general, the rate wouldn't be different for me at my address based on who I'm buying from. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great answer. Another ATR specific question. So when you're looking up items in different states, trying to figure out the taxability for each, do you have to go in and look into each state, or is there kind of a way to go and look at it as a chart or at like a higher level for each of the states? Perhaps if you're selling into many. I'm not sure if we would need to do a demo again to show that, or maybe you can just speak to it, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, it's tax charts. Again, it's included in a standard subscription. You can look at a library and look at the simple T's and E's of that library across. You can customize the state selection, right? So you can look at everything. You can look at 5 states. You can look at 10 states, whatever you want to do. And that's another area where I might also recommend, depending on the complexity that you need or the customizability, you could also use the tax matrix for that as well. You could use your build a matrix function with a premium subscription. But again, if all you need is the simple T's and E's, that tax charts is included in a standard subscription.
Okay. We've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So one from Scott here, and I think we already answered this, but just in case, because it seems like there's a couple more details here. Is it possible to share a tax research subscription across a corporate group, i.e. a parent/subsidiary structure, or must each legal entity have its own subscription? This might be something that we might want to pass along to an Avalara rep, but Luke, Maria, any initial thoughts there?
Yeah, we would probably want to pass it on to, and talk about it in a selling cycle. But we do, we've got it both ways. So it depends. I know that's not necessarily an answer, but we look at the requirements for your business and we talk about it with the sales folks.
Got it. Okay, just another question I jotted down here. Does ATR provide guidance on withholding tax issues on international sales tax?
No. So it's focused on sales and use here domestically, and then where we offer global, Canada, Mexico as part of our North American add-on, and then the EU plus the UK as part of our European add-on. We're just focused on that, right? So we don't cover things like tax treaties. We don't cover things like here back in the States, right? The B&O up in Washington or the CAT in Ohio. Now, having said that, while we don't support that and we don't explicitly research that stuff, a lot of that stuff tends to be in the same statute. So if you're okay going to do the legal research on your own, that's okay. The information's there, but we don't support it. We don't answer questions on it. So it's just focused on those sales and use or transaction type taxes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, it looks like we only have 2 minutes left. Thank you all for attending today. I'm going to do a little last minute housekeeping here. Just as a note too, we do save all of the questions and they are saved internally by us. So we'll see some and then, connect with you afterwards if we weren't able to answer your question fully here. But to close out, if you qualified for CPE credit, you can download your certificate now in the CPE certificate engagement tool. Your certificate will also be available in a post-event email that you'll receive within the next 24 hours. Also, in that post-event email, we'll include a link to this console to view the on-demand recording, slide deck, and additional resources. But that's all. Thank you so much, Luke and Maria, for an incredible presentation. And we'll hope to see you all soon. Have a great day, everyone.